On the eve of her death, she held a lantern that burned without oil. And every flicker was a confession from beyond the grave. That is where our story begins. In Salem, in the year 1692, the air was heavy and cold, pressing down like the weight of judgment itself. Outside, snow drifted from a low sky, quieting the town into uneasy silence. Inside the jail, in a damp, candlelit cell, Margaret Holloway waited. She was 19, pale and unyielding, her dark hair tangled from days in captivity, her eyes sharp and unblinking, eyes that remembered everything. The cell was narrow, its stone walls slick with moisture, its floor so cold it seemed to gnaw at her bones. A plank of wood served as her bed, but it felt more like a coffin waiting to close around her. Hunger had left her, fear had tried and failed to conquer her. All that remained was memory, and Margaret's memory never failed. She remembered the faces of the accused before her, the neighbors who had been dragged into the court, the mothers who cried for children they would never see again. She remembered the girl of 12 condemned for humming too sweetly, a widow accused because she read her psalms too loudly, and the way the judge's gavel struck the bench with such finality as though every strike broke a soul. Above all, she remembered Reverend Elias Crowthorne, the towering figure whose sermons turned fear into fire. His words, sharpened with holy fervor, spread suspicion like a plague. She had seen him lift the Bible high, his voice rolling like thunder, turning men into accusers and women into trembling shadows. His words lodged in her like splinters. Tonight, they had given her something new to remember. The jailer had entered reluctantly, his face pale, his eyes refusing to meet hers. In his hands he carried a lantern. But this lantern was no ordinary light. It burned without oil. Its flame glowed amber, steady, unnatural. He set it on the floor and left without a word, retreating as though afraid of what it might reveal. Margaret leaned forward, studying it. No smoke. No smell of fuel. Only light, living and strange. She lifted it cautiously. The flame trembled, and the shadows around her shifted unnaturally, crawling like hands across the stone walls. And then, the first voice came. A child's voice, soft, trembling. "Help me." Margaret gasped, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that voice. She had seen that child once, pale and still, condemned by whispers and superstition. But this memory was not hers alone. The lantern had brought it to life. The flame flickered again and showed her faces, one after another. A woman who had been burned for singing too joyfully in church. A man dragged away for reading forbidden books. Then faces Margaret did not know, faces of people yet unborn, their eyes wide with horror at things she could not yet name. The lantern was not bound to time. It carried the weight of memory itself. Margaret's hand trembled, though her will did not. She whispered into the silence, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The lantern gave no answer. Only another flicker, another face contorted in grief, a cry that rose and broke into nothing. The voices filled the cell, a gathering storm of memory and confession. In the trial hall, Reverend Crowthorne wrestled with his own shadows. He stood before dying torches, the smell of smoke clinging to his robes, his hands clasped in restless prayer. The lantern had been his idea, his invention, his claim of a holy relic. He had told the people it was divine, a light that would reveal the devil's lies and the condemned. In truth, he had forged it out of fear, out of guilt, a desperate attempt to bury his conscience beneath spectacle. He whispered to himself, it was meant to bring truth to this darkness. But the darkness in him was louder than prayer, and truth was never on one man's side. Margaret sat with the lantern as it burned brighter, as the whispers grew more frantic. The voices spoke of hidden torches, of meetings held in the forest, of hands stained with secret deals. She carried the mark of the oak. He traded his son. They whispered in the dark. Margaret's mind raced. Her memory was exact, unforgiving, a net that caught every detail. She began to see what the lantern truly revealed. It was not the condemned who were chosen. It was the guilty. The flame turned, and suddenly the visions sharpened. She saw Reverend Crowthorne shaking hands with the judge in secret, their faces lit by torchlight. She saw parchment exchanged, accusations planned like harvests, names chosen before evidence was ever spoken. She saw men gathered in the woods, whispering, deciding who would burn and who would profit. She saw the women lined up, silent, waiting, knowing their fate had been written before they ever stood trial. Margaret clutched the lantern to her chest. The voices pressed against her skull, but then, the flame steadied and revealed something new. Not the past. Not guilt. The future. Margaret saw herself, alive. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes still fierce. She stood before a crowd, her voice carrying over silence, her story told at last. They listened. Not with suspicion, not with fear, but with reverence. She saw Reverend Crowthorne too, but not at a pulpit. He stood at a gallows, a rope around his neck. His face was pale with terror, his body shaking with the same fear he had once commanded in others. The lantern steadied, the vision seared into Margaret's mind. She whispered, "So it is not I who burn." Morning broke cold and merciless. The jailer returned with the executioner. The rope was ready, the gallows already waiting. Margaret set the lantern down. Its flame did not flicker. It burned steady, as if truth itself had decided to remain in the room. Reverend Crowthorne entered, his presence still heavy, but his eyes unsettled. He looked at her, and for a moment his mask cracked. He saw not a girl awaiting death, but something larger, something eternal. His voice quavered as he said, "Confess. Confess, and save your soul." Margaret only stared at him, her gaze cutting deeper than words. "I remember," she said. The words struck him harder than any accusation. For he knew what she remembered. He knew the visions she had seen. And he knew what the lantern had revealed. The crowd gathered outside, their breath rising in white clouds against the bitter morning air. Margaret walked to the gallows with calm steps. She did not beg, she did not fight. She only carried memory with her, and memory weighed more than fear. They say she died that day, that the rope silenced her. But some whisper another ending. They say that when her body swung, the lantern in her cell flared brighter than ever, burning without oil, its light spilling across the town like fire against the snow. They say it revealed the liars, not the witches. And in that light, people began to see the truth. Centuries have passed since Salem's madness. The trials are words in history books, their terror dulled by distance. Yet the story of Margaret Holloway lingers. Some say she became more than a victim. She became a witness, a flame that could not be extinguished. There are those who claim her lantern still appears on winter nights in Salem, its amber fire glowing without fuel, its light steady and watchful. Some say it guides the lost. Others believe it finds only the guilty, forcing them to remember what they would rather forget. And perhaps that is the true legacy of Margaret Holloway. Because fear turns truth into shadows, but sometimes shadows burn brightest. In the darkest of nights, even a single lantern can light the path of memory, and the path of justice.